Alright guys, so today we're going to get started with just kind of moving around in Unreal. It's a little, sorry, in Maya. It's a little different than moving around in Unreal, so I just want to get comfortable with that. So really to move around in this program, you're going to be using Alt a lot. You cannot use QWE and R like you could in Unreal. So holding down Alt, use the left mouse button to rotate. Use the middle mouse button to go to zoom, which acts like kind of like a zoom on a camera. If you want to move forward, you spin the middle mouse button, and you don't have to hold down Alt to do that. But you see the difference. If you hold down, if you zoom, if you move in and out with the middle mouse button, it looks like that. When you zoom, it looks like this, and you can see that the perspective changes when you zoom. Whereas if you move in and out, it just does that. So left click, move around to rotate, and right click, middle mouse to move back and forth, right to zoom in and out. If you want to move left and right in this program, you push the middle mouse button while you hold down Alt, like this. It's definitely not as easy to fly around as it is in Unreal, but you also don't need to as much. Everything's going to be a little bit more localized. This X right here, this grid, can be very useful. Notice that these two lines meet right here. That's going to be where your pivot is in Unreal. So a lot of students kind of forget. They'll build something out here and then, think that that's going to be the pivot because that's where it is here in Maya. But no, it's actually going to be off to the side here. Let me try to show you. You can actually move the pivot. It'll actually be right there, which is really hard to work with. Actually, it's more up, but you get the idea. So, yeah, there we go. So let's undo that, and I think that's basically, and also just like in Maya, in Unreal. I'm going to keep doing that. If you have two objects, if you want to bounce back and forth, you can just do F. It'll focus on that object, which is really useful because then you can rotate around it. Okay, now as far as moving objects and scaling, it's really important that you understand, I'm going to rotate this guy, and notice that when I move it now, it points from the center towards one of the faces, like that. What if, though, just like in Unreal, I wanted it to stay on this line and move it that direction? That's called world direction. So if I go into the Move tool and I double-click, I can set it to from component to world, and then you can see it'll move like that. Usually it's on object. I think that's pretty standard. But yeah, just so you know, there's times when you want to go back and forth between those two. The same is true on scale. If I set it to world scale, it does this, which can be really weird. But if I set it to object scale, it'll stay with the faces of the object, kind of what it originally had. So it's just important to know that's how you would change the settings. Sometimes you have like snaps, like if I'm moving it and I want to set snaps on, I can turn them on to, let's say, 20, and then you can see, well, 20 is quite a bit. Let's do 1. It'll move along the line like that. It's usually a pretty good idea to use the grid as much as you can. So if I were to place a cube and its motion snaps, well, let me turn them off for now. I could get this thing, yeah, this is getting a little complicated, but basically I can use these little magnets right here to snap to, right now I'm snapping to the vertex, and then I can snap to the grid with the vertex as the pivot, and it'll push it right there, which is a great place to have it if you because that's where your pivot point's going to be. And then if I were to make my object, bigger, if I could stick to these grids, it's always really nice to do that, because then when you place it in Unreal, if you're working modularly, everything kind of snaps together nicely. Now you got to keep in mind this is a very, very, very small scale, and if I'm not mistaken, each one of these is, I want to say millimeters, which means that this whole thing is 1 centimeter, which is like just really tiny, but I think that's too small. I think maybe each one of these squares is a centimeter. Yeah, and this whole thing is a meter. That sounds, I'm gonna have to look that up, but regardless, it's definitely a very small scale. So generally when you put things into Unreal, they are going to be, if you just put it in like this, it's just going to be microscopic. You want to put it in more like this. And we'll get into, setting that up perfectly later. It's not really that important, but that's generally what the size of your objects are going to look like. If you want them to be appropriately sized. Yes, of course you can scale them up in Unreal, but it's better not to. It's better to have them the correct size from the get-go. I think that's it with navigation. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video and just let you guys kind of play around with that for a bit. Oh yeah, you know what? There's one more thing. The selection tool. If you're selecting faces, you can select them by just dragging a box. And you'll notice that only selects those 3. Well, that's probably not going to happen in your case. If I go to the selection option here and I double click, I have camera based selection on. Usually that's unchecked. It probably will be by default. So now if I make a selection, it selects not only those, but also the ones behind it. So it's kind of working now, and you can see that if I go wireframe mode, if I select it now, it does that. But if I do camera based selection, it only does those, because that's the only thing the camera can see at the time. Okay, I'll stop for now. That's it.